Shabir's going to set the record straight, ladies and gentlemen.
Today, most Muslims read the Quran in a text that is referred to as the Egyptian edition of 1924. That's how scholars refer to it. Most Muslims may not have realized that this is the designation for that manuscript, for that text. To Muslims in general, this is just simply the Quran. But this is not the only text of the Quran that is read throughout the world. In North Africa, there is a slightly different text that is based on a slightly different reading, mostly corresponding to what we read in the rest of the world, but with some slight variations that do not affect anything that Muslims believe and do not have any major impact on any Muslim practices. And then, too, in some parts of Africa, there is another reading of the Quran and a matching manuscript that is prevalent. And here, too, we find some slight variations that do not affect Muslim beliefs.
Wow. So much packed into that. And Shabir's just getting started here, ladies and gentlemen. But notice, he starts off by saying most Muslims follow the 1924 edition of the Quran. I've heard Christians say it over and over and over and over and over again. When we say it, Muslims say, what are you talking about? We follow the original Quran as laid down by Prophet Muhammad. What are you talking about, 1924? The 1924 is the same as the Quran that was during the time of Prophet Muhammad. That's what we hear. And now you have Shabir Ali. Actually, what Muslims really follow is the 1924 Cairo edition of the Quran. Ladies and gentlemen, Shabir Ali giving Muslims more history of the Quran that they never hear from Muslims, but have been hearing from Christians for years. And now Shabir is acknowledging what we say.
So how do we make sense of all of this? We want to retrace the history of how these manuscripts became divergent. How is it that we have a variety of readings of the Quran and manuscripts to match, or rather even now printed texts to match? Now, today, in a Muslim college in which imams are being trained to serve the community, an imam, if he specializes in the recitations of the Quran, he may be taught as many as 10 different recitations of the Quran. And these 10 recitations complement each other. They basically, again, have no effect on the beliefs of Muslims, and they do not affect in any significant degree the practices of Muslims.
So now Shabir is acknowledging that Muslims who go to Islamic schools to learn the recitation of the Quran may learn as many as 10 different recitations of the Quran. Will learn as many as 10 different recitations of the Quran, but he's saying you don't get a different Islamic belief. Notice he says it doesn't affect practice in any significant way. So he's acknowledging that it might affect practices in certain ways, just not any really major way. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this flies in the face of everything Muslims are taught all their lives. They're taught all their lives perfect preservation right down to the letter. Notice we barely started the video, and Shabir has already acknowledged no, Muslims follow the 1924 Cairo edition. There are multiple other editions. Muslims who go off to Islamic seminary may learn as many as 10 different recitations of the Quran, but at the end of the day, those differences in these different recitations and different versions, they're not things that would affect core, essential Islamic doctrine or practice. And the reason that stands out, ladies and gentlemen, is that is exactly what Christians have been saying forever. When Muslims say, what about all these textual variants in the history of your Bible? Well, guess what? Anytime you have human beings copying down giant books, you're going to end up with tons of textual variants. You never end up with textual variants that affect core Christian doctrine or practice. And Muslims say, doesn't matter. That's not what we're talking about. If one letter's been changed, your book's completely corrupted, can't be trusted, it hasn't been preserved by God. And now you've got Muslims, there are all these variants of the Qurans, there are different versions of the Qurans. And by the way, Shabir's just getting started. He's going to say so much interesting stuff here. But his takeaway is, it's not really important because it doesn't affect core Islamic doctrine or practice. So notice what Shabir's saying. If these differences don't affect, core practice or belief, then it's not really a significant issue. Well, great. Then there went all of your objections to the history of the Bible, ladies and gentlemen. They all just went bye-bye.
Muslim scholars have made sense of this by referring to a tradition according to which the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, said that the Quran has been revealed in 7 ahruf. And I have to come back and explain that term, ahruf. In any case, that tradition says you can recite of any of these, whichever is easy for you. And moreover, that each one of them by itself is complete, and each one serves as a healing. Now, to use comparable language from our Christian friends, we see that sometimes there is the statement, that which is sufficient for your salvation. So it looks like what this tradition is saying is that if you read according to any one of the readings, then this is sufficient for your salvation.
I think he goes on to say, we scholars don't even know what the ahruf are, which is amazing because Allah reveals the Quran in these different ahruf, and you can ask 10 different Muslim scholars what the ahruf are, and you get 10 different answers. They don't even know. They don't even know what these things are. Forza here says, not differences in the content, differences in pronunciations, but the meaning of the word don't change. It's just like the difference in the pronunciation of Irish English versus USA English. I mean, first of all, we have to clarify. It can't possibly just refer to different pronunciations, because during the time of Muhammad, even people from the same tribe would disagree in their recitation of the Quran. So they're from the same tribe, they spoke the same dialect, and they're using different versions of the Quran. So this isn't simply different pronunciation. But I'd like to point out, Forza, you basically got different things. One, you have manuscripts today, and you can line up the manuscripts side by side. So if you line up the Hafs and Warsh and so on, you see differences. They're not simply different pronunciation, there are different words there. But if you go back to the Muhammad's early reciters of the Quran, people like Ibn Masud and Ubay ibn Ka'b and so on, you find things like this. So if you read Surah 33, verse 6 of the Quran, it says in the version you have today, the prophet is closer to the believers than their own selves, and his wives are their mothers. So that's what it says. The prophet is closer to the believers than their own selves, and his wives are their mothers. Let me read to you a comment from Yusuf Ali's translation of the Quran when he adds a comment at the bottom. Here's his comment. In some qiras, like that of Ubay ibn Ka'b, occur also the words, and he is a father of them, which imply his spiritual relationship and connection with the words, and his wives are their mothers. So notice, if you read the Quran today, it says, prophet is closer to the believers than their own selves, and his wives are their mothers. But if you went to Ubay ibn Ka'b's version of the Quran, it says, and he is a father of them, meaning Muhammad is your father, your sort of spiritual father, spiritual sense. The words, he is a father of them, are not in your Quran. They were in Ubay ibn Ka'b's edition and a couple other editions, a couple other versions of the Quran. So I feel... I'm shocked that we even have to say this. Is a verse of the Quran that says, and he is a father of them, and a verse of the Quran that doesn't have that, it doesn't say he is a father of them at all, is that a different pronunciation?
But now, the tradition says that the Quran has been revealed in the 7 modes. Now, I said ahruf previously, that's an Arabic word, and the singular is harf, which means letter. So it literally means 7 letters. But this word could also mean edge. The word harf could mean edge. So maybe it means 7 limits. And in fact, Muslim scholars have not been able to define this term with any unanimity. And a wide variety of opinions have been given as to what this term means. What does it mean to say that the Quran has been revealed according to 7 edges or 7 letters? It may mean, according to some scholars, that the Quran has been revealed according to 7 dialects of the Arabic language.
The word harf, it can mean letter, or it can mean edge. Muslim scholars don't agree on what these huruf are. One suggestion is that it's dialects. Again, that doesn't make sense, ladies and gentlemen, because even people from the same tribe who indisputably spoke the same dialect were reciting different versions of the Quran. So this, I would say, it can't refer to dialect. It has to refer to something else. But notice what Shabir is saying here, right? You've got all these different versions of the Quran. Muhammad explains it by saying, oh, but the Quran is revealed in these 7 ahruf. And you ask Muslim scholars, well, what in the world does that mean? We don't know. We have no idea what it means. But it's been perfectly preserved somehow. Yep. And believe us, believe whatever we say.